Your next step could be your last. The ground looks the same as every patch of jungle floor you have crossed today. Wet, brown, ordinary. Somewhere in this single square foot of mud, someone has been waiting for you since before you even landed in this country. Are you standing on it right now? For nearly 60,000 American soldiers who never went home, silence like this was the last thing they remembered before the earth broke open. You did not come to Vietnam to fight an enemy you could see. A sharpened length of bamboo, a rusted nail, a tin can wired to a hand grenade. In this jungle, that was often enough to end a career, a leg, or a life. Government studies conducted after the war revealed a chilling reality. Mines and booby traps caused roughly 11% of all American combat deaths, and close to 1 in 5 of the men wounded in the field. Let that sink in. This was never just a war of rifles and helicopters. It was a war of patience, of absolute psychological exhaustion, and the constant, grinding dread of a battlefield that refused to stay still. The most common trap waiting under your boots is the Punji stake. It is nothing more than a length of bamboo, sharpened to a point and hardened over an open fire. It is placed inside a shallow pit, hidden beneath a delicate lattice of leaves and twigs. Step through that cover, and the stake drives upward through the sole of your boot before your brain even registers the pain. The Viet Cong routinely smeared these stakes with human or animal waste. They packed them into the mud on purpose, not to kill you, but to ensure that a simple puncture wound became a raging, blood-poisoning infection within days. There was a calculated brutality to this design. A dead soldier is carried out quietly, his war over. But a wounded man requires 2, sometimes 4, of his squad mates to lift him, carry him, and defend him through thick, hostile jungle. One wound effectively neutralized half a platoon, exposing every single rescuer to ambush. The physical injury was never the real weapon. The burden of saving you was. Tripwires hung at knee height across trails your platoon had walked 100 times before. They were as thin as monofilament fishing line, nearly impossible to spot in the green, shadowed light of the canopy. One careless step, and you might trigger a grenade wedged in the fork of a tree. Or worse, the weapon GIs called the Bouncing Betty. This was the American-made M16 anti-personnel mine, captured and replanted by the enemy. When stepped on, it triggers a small launching charge that projects the canister waist-high into the air before the main warhead detonates, spraying jagged shrapnel in a deadly 360-degree circle. It was engineered to maim. It targeted the exact height that would end a young man's ability to walk, to have children, or to ever feel whole again. In other sectors, units encountered tiger traps, camouflaged pits lined with heavy, angled spikes, designed so that a falling soldier would be impaled from multiple directions at once, his own body weight driving the stakes deeper as he struggled. Other traps relied on the tension of the jungle itself. The bamboo whip trap utilized a sapling, pulled back like a longbow, held in place by a trigger wire. When tripped, the wood snapped forward at chest height, driving a row of poison-tipped spikes into anyone standing in its path. No explosion, no warning shot, only the sudden, violent rush of bamboo cutting through the air, followed by the heavy silence of the jungle closing back in. How do you stay alert to a threat that could be anywhere for months on end without your mind fracturing under the weight of constant watching? This was the quiet question that haunted every soldier who served a full tour. The United States Army tried to systematize the answer. They issued Field Manual 531, titled simply Booby Traps, training GIs to look for slightly disturbed earth, unnatural angles in the grass, or the faint glint of copper wire at dusk. But a printed manual cannot drown out the sound of a friend's scream still ringing in your ears from the patrol you ran yesterday. Reconnaissance reports from MAC-VSOG, the highly classified Joint Command operating along the borders, noted that trap density multiplied exponentially near the supply routes the Viet Cong protected most. Entire trail networks became slow, deliberate obstacle courses, built one sharpened bamboo spike at a time. In January of 1967, during Operation Cedar Falls, American forces launched a massive search and destroy mission into the Iron Triangle, a heavily fortified enemy stronghold northwest of Saigon. The earth there had been prepared for years. It was laced with interconnected tunnels and dense networks of hidden charges. GIS described entire fields seeded with pressure-sensitive mines, forcing whole companies to move on their hands and knees, probing the mud ahead with bayonets. Some units advanced barely a single mile in an entire day. Progress was no longer measured in territory gained. It was measured in trust, and whether the point man walking ahead of you had checked the earth carefully enough for both of your lives. Picture your first real week on patrol. You wake before dawn, in green fatigues that never fully dry in this humidity. Your sergeant reminds the line, for the 100th time, to step exactly where the man in front of you has stepped. By midday, your calves ache from the unnatural, dragging shuffle you have adopted without realizing it, testing the resistance of the mud with each stride before fully committing your weight. A sudden bird call to your left. Is it real, or a signal passed between scouts you cannot see? You can never be sure. Your grip on your M16 tightens anyway. Then, somewhere just ahead of you, a sound like a soda bottle popping open. And then someone screams a name you know. It was not gunfire. In this war, it rarely needed to be. The strategic logic of the jungle was simple. A wounded soldier was far more useful to the Viet Cong than a body bag. A casualty forced a medical evacuation. It meant calling in a Huey helicopter to land in a raw, exposed clearing, a landing zone, drawing intense enemy mortar and RPG fire onto every soldier trying to load the stretcher. It drained resources. It demanded morphine, blood plasma, and transport helicopters under immense tactical risk. But most of all, that wounded soldier became a story told in whispers to every terrified replacement arriving at the base camp, wearing down the unit's resolve long before they ever saw a muzzle flash. The wound was the weapon. Fear was the ammunition. To survive, soldiers constructed small, silent rituals to anchor their minds. A specific pattern of lacing their combat boots. A lucky ace of spades tucked into a helmet band. A strict refusal to speak certain words before crossing the perimeter. None of it was logical. But when the ground beneath your feet cannot be trusted, the human mind will cling to anything that stays still. Point men were chosen for their instinct and trusted like gods, because the survival of the entire squad rested on one man's ability to read a faint shadow in the dirt half a second before his boot came down. Veterans who lived through this constant, low-grade terror developed a state of mind that clinical psychologists would later term hypervigilance. A brain that refuses to power down, eternally scanning, forever bracing for the quiet click underfoot. It did not turn off when they peeled off their wet boots, and it did not turn off when the transport plane finally touched down on American soil. How do you teach a mind to stop checking the floor when the war is over? For many, the honest answer was that they never did. Decades later, the clay in places like the Iron Triangle and the dense hills along the Ho Chi Minh Trail still holds active ordnance. Vietnamese deminers, working alongside organizations funded in part by American veterans, continue to clear fields not far from where teenagers once tested the soil with bayonets, one agonizing step at a time. Museums preserving this history still display these recovered Punji stakes and deactivated M16 casings behind glass, artifacts of a war where the deadliest weapon was rarely aimed and fired, but planted in the dark and left to wait. You will likely never walk through a jungle rigged with tripwires, but think about the last time uncertainty made you hesitate, made you test the water before committing to a decision. That survival instinct, the one that makes you look twice before trusting solid ground, was carved permanently into the minds of an entire generation of young men. And they carried it home with them long after the jungle had been left behind. Your next step could be your last, they told themselves, every single day for a year. Because in the deep green of Vietnam, the enemy they feared most was never the man holding the rifle. It was the ground they had decided, just for a second, to trust.